A very good friend of mine, and a guy who I don't think television does justice to. He is one of the smartest and most reasoned and best Americans I know, Judge Napolitano. He's a Fox News senior judicial analyst, and he is now the author of a book that Judge, did you write this for me? I mean, this is my
Glenn,
book.
You gave me the idea for this all those times that we were working together down in Studio D at Fox News Channel, and you reminded me of how most of America misunderstands the progressive era and has taken these two monsters, Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt, and idolized them, whereas in reality they began the monster government that thought it could right any wrong and regulate any behavior and tax any event, which perhaps culminated, their vision culminated last Tuesday, 100 years after they started it.
Yeah, it's amazing most people don't understand, and it drives me crazy when I hear people like Newt Gingrich say, oh no, you know, Theodore Roosevelt, he was my favorite president. The guy was a nightmare. The guy was a nightmare. You can take and pick and choose and say, that was kind of cool, and that was kind of cool. But if you know what he was really all about, especially when he started to run, you know, after against Woodrow Wilson, this guy was a nightmare. Both of them were.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Glenn, because they hated each other. As you know, they ran against each other, and one could argue that because of Roosevelt's arrogance and insistence that he get a third term after retiring for 4 years, he split the Republican vote, or certainly the anti-Wilson vote, between himself and William Howard Taft, who was the president and was his designated successor. But notwithstanding their animosity toward each other, Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, they really agreed on this. The Constitution does not mean what it says. It is not the supreme law of the land. It does not limit the federal government to the specific powers delegated to the federal government in the Constitution. Rather, in their view, the federal government can do anything it wants, as long as it is not expressly prohibited by the Constitution. Now, that is 180 degrees from what their predecessors and from what the founders believed when they wrote the Constitution and created this republic.
So we have NBC announcing that they're going to do a story on a new series on George Washington, where George Washington is a philanderer, and they say it's based in historic fact. I mean, what they're going to do to him now. This kind of stuff really started with Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt, and you said, culminating really in the last election. Judge, what is left of the Constitution at this point?
Well, it's a difficult question for me to answer. Difficult because, as you know, I've taken a couple of oaths to uphold it, because I believe it created a country dedicated to personal freedom, not dedicated to government aggrandizement. But all of that has changed. What is left is basically the structure of government, but the individual guarantees of liberty in there are no longer around. I'll take it to today. If the FBI, without a search warrant, can read the emails of the chief spy in the United States of America to his mistress on an issue that has no relation whatsoever to federal criminal law or national security, they can do it to anybody else.
Well, let me make the argument here, Judge. It does matter to national security because it puts him in a position of being blackmailed.
Well, I don't think you could be blackmailed for something if people are threatening to reveal an event that everybody knows. I don't believe the FBI stumbled on this in a Pollyanna way, as the government would have us believe. I believe they knew about this since they conducted their background check of him at the time he was nominated to be a director of the Central Intelligence Agency. They knew about it because they saw the visitor logs, and they saw how frequently Mrs. Broadwell visited him, and they knew where she slept and where she stayed when she was with him. And they also interviewed everybody around him, so they were aware of the gossip and the innuendo and the fear that this might come out while he was still the commander of troops in Afghanistan. I think he was done in. I'm not particularly a fan of his, though I believe he's intellectually honest. I think he was done in by forces in the administration that wanted to weaken him before he could tell the truth about what happened in Benghazi. And I think he was prepared to tell the truth, to correct the version of events he gave on September 14th, to state who gave him that version of events on September 14th. And now whatever he says will be in secret, and he's damaged goods, and there's a reason to disbelieve what he's going to say. So the people who wanted to destroy him, in my view, have succeeded.
So can you tell me, because the president says, well, you know what, there's all kinds of protocol, and I didn't know. I certainly didn't know until after they fired him, which is ridiculous to believe. But I didn't know. Judge, is there something that I mean, the FBI shouldn't have been investigating this in the first place, but is there some sort of protocol that you know that should have kept the president in the dark?
Well, the director of the FBI meets with the president in private for an hour every week, and his task is to inform the president of investigations that the president should know about. Now, you really don't need to go much farther than that. The president should know that FBI agents are reading the private secret emails of the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The president says, oh, they weren't going to tell me about it because then I'd interfere, and you'd accuse me of interfering with the prosecution. There was no prosecution. There's not going to be any prosecution of David Petraeus. I believe that Bob Mueller told the president, but he chose not to reveal the fact that he knew this. If Mueller did not tell the president, then Mueller, who's also known for intellectual honesty and playing fair and not being a political hack, did not do his job. Okay. The whole thing comes down to whatever was going on at Benghazi, the president is prepared to lie and to throw good people under the bus in order to keep the American public from discovering the truth.
Okay, so when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit more about Theodore and Woodrow, who started all of this, and where we go from here. How do you reverse what Theodore and Woodrow did? How do we save the remnants of the Constitution and put it all back together? Back in a minute. So, Judge, Theodore and Woodrow, they start out 100 years ago to reverse things. Theodore wanted to go farther than Woodrow did, at least openly. Woodrow ended up going farther than Roosevelt said he was going to go.
Right, right.
When Woodrow says, you know, when the Americans start to reject progressivism and saying, you guys are spooking the bat snot out of us, they go undercover. They set this time bomb to go off, and it just dismantles everything all the way along until we get here. How do we reverse this?
Well, they began the creation of the era of dependency, which has now reached almost the tipping point. It's almost reached 50%. When Mitt Romney in the campaign was talking about 47%, he's talking about people who rely on the government for a substantial portion of their income. Some of them are very good people who paid into the government Social Security and Medicare. Some of them are people who can't work. Most of them, many of them, are people who don't work and won't work. Nevertheless, there is nearly half the country at the present state in history relying on money either extracted from the other half or borrowed in the name of the other half for their subsistence. None of this is authorized by the Constitution, but this will continue to perpetuate itself. Up till FDR, Republicans resisted this, but when they saw how this scheme worked, promise to give money, deliver on your promises, you'll get votes in return. By the time LBJ came along, half the Republicans in the Congress voted for the expansion of the Social Security program into Medicare and Medicaid. So how does this end? This will end when the government doesn't have checks that clear anymore, when government wires into your bank account don't mean anything, or when you need a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of gas. That will lead to a revolution.
Yeah, that leads to really bad places, because people don't even understand. They don't even look to the Constitution anymore. They don't look to the founders anymore. Those are a bunch of old guys. You know, they're actually talking about, hey, I've heard the left say we should have people tweet ideas for their new Constitution. What? I mean, look at the work that the founders did on this. They were giants, intellectual giants. How do you put it back together? For instance, people say secession. That's not possible without war. Right?
Well, listen, it's probably not possible without war. We know what Lincoln did, and we can imagine what Barack Obama would do. But Lincoln also said that with public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. If public sentiment is for secession, if public sentiment is for something peaceful yet radical to dismantle or reduce the federal government, then I think that there will be an incentive on the part of those who make these decisions to go along with public sentiment. One interesting proposal about secession is not total secession, but partial secession. The United States of America would become a federation of about 10 smaller countries, the Northeast, the Southwest, etc. And those countries would have different levels of freedom. And you could, as Ronald Reagan once said, vote with your feet. That was once the case with the states.
That's the way.
But when Woodrow Wilson destroyed the sovereignty of the states, there became next to no difference between them.
It is amazing to me. We got to go for the break, but it's amazing to me. You hit it right on the head. This is the way it was before Theodore and Woodrow. This is the way it was. We're not voting for secession. We're voting for a restoration. We don't want to break away from the other states. We just want you do in your state what you want to do. Let us do in our state what we want to do. Leave us alone, Washington. Judge, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Glenn.
I hope to see you again soon.
In Dallas next time.
You got it. Judge Napolitano, and the book is Theodore and Woodrow. You want to educate yourself? This guy nails it. Theodore and Woodrow. Back in a minute.